For the first 4 presentations, we share with you that the book of Revelation presents Jesus as the Lamb that was slain for all of us, as the one who paid the price that we don't have to. Last night we were sharing with you there's nothing for us to be afraid of the judgment, because God Himself puts Himself on trial, that He would be judged and that the universe would discover that God is love. And because of that, when we are with Him and in Him, we have nothing to fear, because He's not only the judge, but He is our advocate. And so you hear from each lecture this one verse that we keep repeating from Revelation 14, for the hour of His judgment has come. What does it mean? When does that hour begin? What is that hour of judgment coming? So today we're going to talk to you about this God's timetable. All in good time, all in God's time, all according to God's time. And God does have a schedule. I want to share with you this brief story just to visualize. Over 100 years ago, as people traveled settling west, there was this huge river that once they crossed, they knew they're on their own. It's a wild, wild west. Once they cross Mississippi River and proceed west, trouble. And in this particular setting, as they traveled, they saw far west burning smoke. They realized there is a brush fire, the prairies fire. They got worried because to go back to the river, they didn't have enough time, and the river is the only barrier that would protect them. As I traveled months ago with my boys all the way to the west coast to Los Angeles, we drove. It was interesting to come to that 100th meridian and read all the inscriptions that once you go west from here, there's no more rain until you reach the coastal plains. And so one of the older men organized a controlled burn behind them. See, they burned the grass behind them. They plowed some dirt around and burned the grass. And once that controlled burn was done, he ordered the group of settlers to go back on that burned place. And so they stood there waiting for the fire to come. And those fires, they take days. You hear right now about all the fires burning all over the place. And so the little ones in the camp got scared. Wouldn't fire again come? You know the answer. Fire can't burn where it has already burned, because there's nothing to burn. That's why they do control fire. And so, friends, I'm starting with this illustration for you to understand. Jesus Christ took the hellfire on Himself, that you and I have nothing to fear. Jesus Christ took all the awfulness of what we do, of what all the generations before us have done, that we have nothing to fear, because the price has been paid. And that's why gospel writers write these wonderful words, on Him almighty vengeance fell, which would have sunk a world to hell. He bore it for a chosen race, and thus becomes our hiding place. If you're in Jesus, you should not fear anything that comes against this world, because the judgment is given to the saints. If you're in Jesus, you're totally saved. Christ was condemned as a sinner in your place. Now, you know your heart. Apostle Paul, the great preacher, he said, I'm the chief of sinners. You ever wake up and look in the mirror and feel the same way? God knows our heart more than we do, and yet He looks at us and He sees sinless Jesus, because we're covered in the righteousness of Jesus. And so I begin saying, friends, we have nothing to fear, because as we start looking into this timeline, and Ben is going to introduce us to the timeline, we get nervous, because after all, what if we are in trouble? But we want to start with this disclaimer. We have nothing to fear. All we have to fear is God. Fear God and give glory to him. For the hour of his judgment has come. All we have to fear is what? God. Are you right with God? Are you in relationship with God? That's the only thing we have to care for.
So as we go into the timeline of judgment, we are going to look at an angel's explanation of the judgment. Daniel chapter 8, verse 14 says, "For 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed." Now, verse 27 says, "I was astonished by the vision, but none understood it." So Daniel gets this vision in Daniel 8 and 9, and basically he's so astonished at it, he basically doesn't understand. So he needs help. He needs help, angelic help, and he receives that. We studied previously that in the Bible there's a day for year principle. So every year, or every day represents a year in prophetic time. And in the Bible prophecy, you have these symbols, and we have these days and symbols. And when you look at these things, they all are significant. If we look at the next slide here, Daniel 9:21, says, "Yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. And he informed me and talked with me and said, 'O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand.'" So Daniel gets some help from this angel. And remember, this 2,300 days vision, it's 2,300 years, each day for a year. So the angel Gabriel goes on to explain. Basically, this picture that what Daniel gets is basically taking us all throughout time. He's getting a picture that has everything to do with Jesus Christ. This 2,300 years includes Jesus in it. It's all about Christ. And so in this angel Gabriel takes him centuries into the future and reveals the opening of God's judgment in heaven. This amazing prophecy, Daniel 8:14, chronicles the minute details and of the future that only God could know. Daniel 8:17 says, "Understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end." So the time of the end is the key portion that's highlighted here. The vision of 2,300 days and the cleansing of the sanctuary, according to the angel Gabriel, applies to the time of the end. There are some who believe of a literal 2,300 days. And they believe that this little horn of Daniel chapter 8 applies to this Roman military leader called Antiochus. And what does the Bible teach? We know that 2,300 days is actually 2,300 years. So it can't literally apply to this military leader, Antiochus Epiphanes, who attacked Jerusalem and defiled the Jewish temple. The Bible teaches, well, Gabriel, he showed Daniel a lot. And in Daniel 8, we see these two beasts, Medo-Persia, symbolized by the ram with two horns, Medo-Persia, and we have Greece, which represents this goat with the horn. And so there's this great showdown. Eventually, we know in history that Greece overcomes Medo-Persia. That comes from this goat. And this little horn basically symbolizes a kingdom power that would think to change times and laws. It would think to break down God's law. And so there's a time of judgment. And before Daniel could understand more about this time of judgment, and before he could know more about this little horn power, which would think to change times and laws, well, he faints. He faints. And basically the vision has yet later to be explained further on in the book of Daniel.
Now I want you to open your Bibles to these two chapters that we're focusing on, Daniel 8 and Daniel 9. Two very interesting chapters. Ben mentioned that when Daniel first saw it, he fainted. Here's the reason. In chapter 8, Daniel knows that the time of liberation is near. See, he was captive. By now, he's an old man. He was a young fellow and he was taken in captivity. By now, he's in his 80s. He's old. And he's praying because he wants this captivity to end. And he's asking God, when? How long? And God gives him a vision that pertains to that Yom Kippur, the day of judgment, cleansing of the sanctuary. But then he says 2,300. Now, is that short or long?
It's long.
It's long. And these are not real days. These are prophetic periods, prophetic years. Now, if someone tells you that you have to wait 2,300 years for fulfillment of your dreams, would you be happy?
No.
No. And so Daniel literally faints. He gets sick. 13 years go by before God sends an angel to him again to explain it. And so it's here in chapter 9, the angel comes and begins to talk to him, says, listen, when you started praying, okay, the command went out for me to come and explain to you this vision. Now, friends, I have this simple news for you. Sometimes when you realize you need to pray, God is already working answer out. God starts answering our prayers sometimes before we even start praying. So when we start praying, you realize, wow, God's already sending the answer. And so Gabriel tells Daniel, I'm here for you to explain the vision. And so he's referring to the vision that is described in chapter 8. Chapter 9 is an explanation of the previous vision. Friends, what we're discussing here in chapter 8 that he did not understand is this cleansing of the sanctuary. Now, we're going to go to extra length with Ben to make sure that you understand it, we understand that it all makes sense to everybody, right? Did you notice what two creatures, what two beasts Daniel see immediately? Remember, there was a ram that represented Medo-Persia, and there was a goat that represented Greece. There is something significant there. You could check. If you go to Leviticus chapter 16, it describes the ritual protocol for the Day of Atonement, for the Yom Kippur. Once a year, on that special day of judgment, which they understood as cleansing of the sanctuary, two types of animals were to be sacrificed: a ram and a goat. Now, that goat is from kind of twins. One is kept as a scapegoat. You've heard that term, scapegoat? But one was sacrificed. Now, if you grew up in a Jewish household, once a year you know that it's requested, required, demanded that two animals are sacrificed. What these animals are? A ram and a goat. A ram and a goat every year. Leviticus 16 demands it. So when you see in a vision these two creatures, ram and a goat, what immediately comes to your mind? Day of Atonement. Friends, we're not making this up. We're simply building up on the foundation of understanding Tanakh, understanding the Bible, the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And so now comes an explanation. 70 weeks are determined. Now, these are translations. That word determined in Hebrew is cut off, but we'll come back to it. For your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. A simple statement, but it's a loaded statement. A lot is said there. Notice that to seal up the vision. You know, if you make a certain promise that has a multiple stages, people may doubt if you will deliver. But if you deliver on the first part of the stage, you know what it does? Seals the deal. And so that's why this initial stage was to seal up the vision and prophecy. Because you know this, when that first part is fulfilled, completed, then you know the rest will also be what? Fulfilled and completed. You understand that? And so this vision is based on this timetable. Divine timetable has a precise point of the beginning. The 2300 days vision and the 490 days vision has the same beginning. So now there's more details, and I hope your Bibles are open. Daniel chapter 9, take a look in verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. Now we're not talking about any other city. We're talking about which city? Jerusalem. Who are Daniel's people? Russians? Ukrainians? Rwandans? The Jews, wherever they are. So this is specifically pertaining to Jewish people. Until Messiah the Prince. What does it say? Until the Antichrist? No, until Messiah the Prince. Now you would understand why I'm trying to trick you. Because some people take this prophecy and try to apply it for the Antichrist. Until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Very specific timeline. Now the first portion of this prophecy relates to God's people, the Jewish people. The 70 weeks are determined for your people. Ben already talked a few times about this day-year principle. So let's do some simple math, okay? 70 weeks. Week is how long? 7 days. So 70 multiplied by 7 is how many? 490 days or prophetic years. So from a particular date, there's a 490 years until the second stage of prophecy would be fulfilled. And these first 490 days are for God's people, the Jews. These are literal years. Prophetic days are literal years. Now, I mentioned this word determined. A better translation is cut off. The Hebrew word hatak means to cut something off, to chop something off. When I look at this picture, I said, man, I should have put the picture from our new bridge being built. How many of you have seen it? Because right now you see the two sides and the middle is still kind of cut off. I mean, it's not inserted. It will be inserted soon. But you get the point. The 490 days is a chunk of larger 2,300 prophetic years. You get that point? And the beginning point is the same for the both dates. So let's look at this date a bit more. Know therefore and understand that from going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, that date is set. There would be a command to restore and build Jerusalem. Specificity is given. The streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. Now, historians, they look at the past events to determine that. Now, one prophetic week we focus already is those 7 days or 7 years, right? And notice he said there would be 7 plus 62, so 69 weeks are before Messiah the Prince. So that's 483. Let's do this math. Remember I mentioned that there are few kings that gave the prophecies. I find it interesting in the book of Ezra, chapter 6, and I'm reading in your hearing. The elders of the Jews built and prospered through prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They built and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel and according to the command, singular, of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. I find it interesting, friends, because the historians who record this, they say there was one command. Now, 3 kings are mentioned, right? Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. Because see, God has given a command that this will happen. One king starts and doesn't finish. It's only partially complete. So God raises another king that continues the process. Does he finish? Still partially complete. God waits until the city is rebuilt, until the streets are restored, until the prophecy is fulfilled. And those who know Bible history know until Nehemiah and Ezra got to work. Nehemiah is known as rebuilder of the walls. Because when he came, yes, the temple was built, yes, the priest already began the service, but the city of Jerusalem still laid in ruins. And it was literally Nehemiah who put people, are you living in this neighborhood? You're going to be building this section of the wall. He knew how to motivate the people, and they rebuilt. And from history, we know the date. The date is 457 before Common Era. You see, in Ezra, there is a detailed date given. Issue decree that all those of the people of Israel and priests and Levites in my realm who volunteer to go up to Jerusalem may go with you. That date is known in history as the year 457 BC. And so picture this. We don't have a long enough stage to walk. But if each step is a year, right? 457 steps will bring me to what year? From minus 457 plus 457, which year does it bring me to? 0. You ever seen year 0 on the calendar? You realize that in history you come from -1 to immediately what? +1. See, on your calculator for doing math, you have 0. By the way, 0 is kind of invented number. It's not really a number, right? It means nothing. It's between negative and positive. But in history, there's no year 0. So 457 brings you to year 1. You understand that? And then when you go 26 more steps, it brings you to AD 27. What do we know happened that year? When you open the Gospel of Luke, you read the story of a certain man being baptized. He was born, we don't know exactly when. And see, the prophecy says that from that date, going forward, until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 and 62 weeks. In AD 27, a significant occurrence took place. Certain man, Jesus, who was a carpenter, and by the time he reached about 30, we don't know exactly because his birth is not known to anyone. We don't know when he was born. He was about 30, that's all we know. Came to be baptized. And at baptism, he was anointed by the Holy Spirit, becoming Messiah the Christ. See, the prophecy pinpoints exact year when Christ will take upon himself that role as a Messiah. Remember, there's one more week left, right? We have 70 weeks, and it says the first 7 weeks, then 62 weeks, then 1 week left. And so that week is very, very interesting. Let's read in Daniel what it says. After the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. Was Jesus died because of his own faults? Was he cut off for himself? Not for himself, on our behalf. Messiah is cut off. It even gives a precise time when he will be cut off. It gives prophecy beyond. It talks about destruction. People of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now we know that both the city of Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in year 70 AD. Under the army of Titus, Roman general, the city was destroyed. So it tells you that the fulfillment of this prophecy will happen before the year 70 AD. And that's why we're looking at this particular prophetic year 27. Notice what happens in the middle of this last 7 years this week. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Now, I know I'm speaking miles an hour here, but I want you to pay attention to the language here. When Jesus dies 3.5 years after his baptism, Jesus spends 3.5 years with his disciples doing the ministry. After 3.5 years, he's crucified, and as he's crucified in the spring sometime, the temple veil is torn top to bottom. There's no more need for sacrificial system because all the sacrifices in the world were pointing out to Jesus. Jesus' death on the cross ends all the sacrifices and offerings because God does not need blood and gore. He needs our hearts. And so in this short prophecy of Daniel 9, everything is outlined more than 5 centuries before it happens. Friends, I want you to look again in this summary. 70 weeks are determined for who? The Jewish people. 490 prophetic days or literal years are given for Jewish nation to sort out their mess. And so by the year 27 AD, 79 of those weeks are fulfilled. They're used up. So we have these 7 years, and look what's happening in more details. In that middle of the week, 3.5 years, Jesus is crucified. Some wonder, well, what happens for the next 3.5 years? We're coming there in a moment. I wanted to look at this precise timetable of God. starts with minus 457. It brings us to the year 27 when Jesus is anointed and begins ministry as a Messiah. It brings us to year 31 when Jesus is crucified. When Jesus hung on the cross, he confirmed the covenant with many, with those who accept him. When he hung on the cross, he ended the offering and sacrificial system. That's why, friends, this weekend, we're not killing lambs. This weekend, none of you watched the ram and the goat being killed, right? We're not doing those things because Christ is our Passover slain for us. Jesus Christ is what all these symbols pointed out to. And so Daniel predicted the timing of Jesus' birth and of Jesus' death precisely. Remember I said at the beginning, when this first portion of prophecy is fulfilled, it seals the vision, it seals the prophecy. It tells you the rest will also be fulfilled on time. And so this week continues. Remember, it's for the Jews. Jesus told them, don't leave yet until you receive the power. So they remained there and they continue working with their own people. But after that, something else happens. Because Jesus died not only for the Jews. Notice in this prophecy, the first section is for the Jews. They're the chosen people, they're given mission, they have to complete it. But Jesus is saying, well, there's a time when it would be cut off for the Jews. And now the ministry and mission moves beyond to the rest of the world. What happened in AD 34? There was a stoning of Stephen in Christian history. A persecution of Christians began. They were expelled from Jerusalem. And so the first Christian deacon is murdered by his brothers and sisters. Jewish nation has rejected Jesus as Messiah officially. If for these 3.5 years they still wonder, maybe this is just a sect of Pharisees that we could deal with, at the end of that period, there are historic documents where they start pronouncing anathema to anyone who loves Jesus, who respects Jesus. They're excluded from synagogues. They're totally kicked out. Friends, I want you to look again at this timetable because it's significant to understand. Notice, we're talking here about the first portion, 490. It's important to understand the bigger portion of 2300 prophecy. The timetable is very simple. The city is rebuilt, and the clock begins to tick. 483 years later, Jesus is anointed as Messiah. 3.5 years later, he's crucified for all of us, risen. 3.5 years later, the message is taken by the apostles into all the world. They got scattered, they went all over the place. No more limits. Friends, the first 490 years were designated for the Jews. The last part of this prophecy has to do with who, Ben?
With us today.
With us, you see. And so this is, friends, I want you to understand that as Ben continues reflecting on the next section, that this next chunk has to do with us.
Yes. This is the part in our presentation where it's going to get personal. It's going to come close to us. We've already read this verse, for he said unto me, for 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. That big chunk of 2,300 years has to do with the end portion with us. That first portion, that 490 years, was for the Jews. As we had mentioned earlier, stoning of Stephen, AD 34, that was it. One prophetic day equals 1 year, 2,300 days or years. And you do the math, you subtract that 490 that was cut out or determined, you come up with 1,810 prophetic days or literal years. Okay. So now if we go from AD 34, which was from the stoning of Stephen, as we look at that last portion, out of that portion that was cut off, that 1,810 days or years, it takes us all the way from AD 34, add 1,810, you get what year? 1844, okay? That's important. That's the typical Day of Atonement. 2,300 years or days. Remember that. 1 day equals 1 prophetic literal year. So as we go through, we see this whole connection throughout the Bible, everything from the beginning to end, pointed towards a lamb who was slain, who would die for you and I. And during this time of atonement, we have a choice. We have a divine mandate to choose God or choose Satan, to choose the right one. And I hope we choose Jesus. I hope we choose not the devil, but Jesus. In the light of heaven's end time judgment, God would make up his final appeal, and he's making his final appeal to us. Now is the time of God's judgment. Soon the great controversy between good and evil will be ended. God is restoring truth that has been obscured by human tradition. Truth is coming to our ears today, and will keep on coming through the presentations in this series.
Now, friends, we're living in the literally end times. I believe that since 1844, there's no more prophetic timeline. God's prophetic timeline has ended in 1844. Since then, we're living literally on a borrowed time. Next year would be 180 years of this wondering, why isn't Jesus back yet? Now, there's a lot of deception. You may wonder, so what happened in 1844? What really happened? Come tonight, this is what we're going to talk about. What did really happen in 1844? But in case you wonder more, I want to give you a little prequel. It was in 1844 that the message finally started. Fear God, for the hour of his judgment has come. It's from that year on that Christianity begins to hear the message that God's judgment is coming, that God's judgment has begun, that when Christ comes, he brings his reward with him because it has been already decided. We believe that the judgment of this world is not something to come in the future, but it's something that has been already ongoing. You and I are living in the time of judgment. Tonight we're going to touch more on this, but there is a lot of deception. Let me give you just one example. In the 16th century, there was a Jesuit by name Francisco Rivera who concocted interesting theory. He said, well, these 490 years, yeah, sure, it's been fulfilled with Jesus, but you know what? This last week, this last 7 years, is some distant time in the future. Have you heard left behind rapture theory? The idea that there will be Antichrist and he will make covenant with the world and in the middle of 7 years of tribulation. You've heard those stories? Pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. There's a whole lingo with it. It starts with this one man, from Jesuit fellow by name Francisco Rivera. His goal was very simple, to divert attention from Protestants saying papacy is the Antichrist. Now, they didn't like that. So his goal was, how do we just redirect? And so he created this theory. Today, majority of Protestants have bought into a theory formed by Jesuit. Now, I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm just here to invite you. Make sure you stick with the Bible and not human-made theory. When it says until Messiah the Prince, it means Messiah, not some Antichrist, you see. And so our appeal here at the end is very simple. When you recognize that that first portion of the prophecy has sealed the vision and the prophecy and was fulfilled on time, understand also that the second part of the prophecy is also real and will be fulfilled on time. The time of the end is not in the future. The time of the end is now. The end times, we're living in it now. We're not to speculate as to when. We're not setting dates. We're not doing any predictions. Some people like to make predictions. For instance, as it was in the days of Noah. Do you remember how long Noah was preaching? 120 years, that's a long time. When Noah heard revelation from God that the flood is coming, he didn't even have kids yet. Noah went on preaching, building the boat, starting a family, having kids. He waited 120 years. People mocked him all around, made fun of him, but he was persistent about doing what God said he shall do. Now, we're tempted to speculate. I have to tell this story. When we lived in Alberta, my wife loves garage sales. I like to go thrifting with her too. When we were in the States, it was better because it was on Sunday. Here, it's like Saturday. Driving to church says my eyes are broken, seeing all the garage sales around. But I remember going for a garage sale in Alberta. And it was on Sunday because there are a lot of Adventists there. And we saw this bookshelf. It says religion on sale. Now, I didn't like that sign, but it had a lot of Bibles. And I just recently came from Ukraine, so wanted to buy Bibles and send them to the old country. And so as I picked up some of the best Bibles, I found in one Bible a program from a camp meeting from 1964. Do the math. 1844 plus 120, 1964. Guess what the title of that camp meeting was? As it was in the days of Noah. Could it be that this is the year? Friends, we're not to speculate what the year is. We're simply to know there is no more time. The time has expired. We're living in a time that at any time, since 1844, the time has been running out. We do not know when. So as musicians coming, we're going to sing this song. It may be at morn. We don't know when Jesus is coming. But our appeal is simple. If you understand that the time is running out, if you understand that God's judgment is happening today, how should you live today? Friends, if you understand that judgment is taking place, how should you live today? I know we're all going to stand to sing together. But before that, I want to ask you, if you understand that we're living in time when God's judgment is on, preparing the reward in coming of Christ, stand with me if you understand. There's that connection with our kinetic response and our mental agreement. You're all standing now, not just to sing with us, realizing that we are living on a borrowed time. There is no time to waste.